Okay, welcome back everybody. Hopefully you've had a really good discussion. If anybody figured out the answer to, is food important or not, that would be great if you want to fire those answers later on at us. So we continue with our fantastic lineup of speakers. And again, we're going to hear from both individually and then bring them both back onto stage for a panel discussion. You are in the right room. I appreciate the lights have gone down, and so you might be wondering where you are, but you are in the right room. We've just lowered the lights to stop the glare off the screens for you. So our first speaker this afternoon is Neil Fuller. So Neil is from Sustainable Landscapes and will talk to us about climate smart farming. Cue the snow outside. Future food solutions that do not cost the earth. Neil's groundbreaking work with agricultural soil carbon soared into the spotlight, achieving finalist status in the COP26 Climate Challenge Cup. Having heard Neil speak before, both in a conference setting and also in the field, I'm thrilled that Neil could join us today, and I look forward to hearing about future food solutions. Neil.
Thank you very much, Kelly. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Great pleasure to be here. It's great to have boots back on Lincolnshire soil. Yes, it's snowing. Great backdrop. We're going to talk about climate change. We're going to talk about farming. We're going to talk about food. We're going to talk about all sorts of things. A couple of warnings from me. First thing is I'm a compulsive mover. So if I suddenly disappear off the back of the stage, please don't worry. The other thing is this presentation comes with a health warning. There may be times during this presentation you start to feel uncomfortable. There may be times when your ears start to ring or you have mild nauseating symptoms. We have actually had a couple of genuine cases of infection with enthusiasm. You're not to worry, it all wears off eventually. Okay, we're going to talk about farming, we're going to talk about the food side of things, really important. I'm going to give you some practical examples of what's going on at farm level, some great work you guys are doing, absolutely fantastic. I'm going to start by looking at climate change. I've got to be honest, the climate's always changing. If you go back to the last cold snap, this is what our little corner of northwest Europe actually looked like. It was colder, it was drier, there's a little less CO2 in the atmosphere. You could have walked from Connemara to Vladivostok without getting your feet wet. You could have grown potatoes right in the middle of the North Sea if you wanted to. Go back to the last warm snap, a little bit further back in time. Now if you're standing in the blue bit, you've got wet feet. Temperatures about the same as they are today. Atmospheric CO2 levels up a bit, and the implication is as atmospheric CO2 levels rise, the planet warms up, but as atmospheric CO2 levels drop, the planet cools down, and that's a really important thing to understand because the only people that can engage in global cooling are right here in this room. It's a really empowering thing to understand. Okay, we've got a net zero ambition. We're going to talk about emissions in a minute. Let me show you what would actually happen at net zero. We've put enough CO2 in the atmosphere to probably give us a 3-degree surface temperature lift. We're already at 1.5 degrees today. There's not a little further to go, and we're at this 3 degrees threshold. That is what net zero would look like. Net zero is us just putting the brakes on, okay? That is not climate reversal, that's us just stopping global warming, all right? That's going to be a really hard thing to live with. Right now, nearly half the gross domestic product of the planet is at moderate to severe risk of what we've already seen as climate interruptions. About a third of the driving force is farming and food production, and I'm going to put those two together because I don't think they should be separated. The neat bit, it's now cheaper to fix the problem than it is to destroy the planet, and that's where food comes in, and that's where empowering individuals comes in, and that again is your gift to give. What it allows us to do is really challenge this mantra of cheap food, and if we take that one to bits, we can start changing the dialogue. We stop focusing on cost and we start talking about value. What value do we deliver? Just to give you an idea from my point of view, I'm really fired up on food and food quality. Today, National Health Service is spending about 5 times more treating food-related disorders than British farmers got paid for growing the food in the first place. That spend is the wrong way around, it's the wrong side of the problem, and it really needs to be addressed. That's really what we're going to talk about today, rebuilding food supply. Okay, so we're going to talk about food. Where's the carbon in food come from? Let me draw you a little picture. Here we are at farm level. We're going to grow wheat. Had a lovely presentation earlier on, milling wheat, the value of that, really important. We're going to grow wheat. We're doing our best to keep our yields up, our qualities up, keep our production emissions down. I'm going to show you more about that in a second. We might pass that wheat on to a merchant who might dress it, dry it, store it for us, hand it on to a miller. That miller might do something really clever with it, flake it, roll it, turn it into something we can understand as a really important ingredient for food. And then that gets into the hands of people who really know what they're doing in terms of food magic, and they make stuff out of that half the world would consider is a staple. Half the world would consider bread as a really significant part of what they do and how they do it. Now, the important bit is when you look at this whole thing, the carbon we generate at farm level actually bounces its way right the way through the value proposition that takes wheat and puts it on a breakfast table. And as it goes through that process, it delivers a little bit of a contribution to the global warming potential, the GWP, that we heard about in the previous presentation. The important bit to understand is that farming has a really big reach. If we put 1 kilo of wheat in at this end of the value chain, at the other end we can actually deliver 400-gram loaves of bread, and each one of those loaves of bread is going to be carrying a wee bit of carbon that we generated at farm level. When you look at bread and you look at the carbon footprint of bread, we can see there are all sorts of things that influence its global warming potential. We've got transport and energy and all manner of things, packaging, and the big bit is us. More than half the carbon footprint of a loaf of bread is to do with us. Now, the really neat bit, the framework that lots of retailers, lots of brands are now reaching out to actually work this program around Science-Based Targets Initiative, written by a wonderful young lady. I hope they crown her Empress of the Universe at some stage, Martha Stevenson. She has given each and every one of you the toolkit you need to build a bright future. And we're going to do it through 2 things. We're going to look at reducing our emissions, and then we're going to look at how we can pull carbon out of the atmosphere, store it safely in the ground for the permanence period you heard earlier about, and then offer that to everybody else that wants to play with it. What are brands doing about it? They're marking up their particular commodities with smart QR codes so that ordinary people can scan that code and see the extraordinary job that farmers are doing to deliver food and drink using climate smart concepts. So we're looking at building the soil, building crops, building nutrition, helping biodiversity. The whole thing bundles up, stack benefits you heard about earlier before, and I'm going to show you a real life example of that in a second. What it's actually doing, this Science-Based Targets Initiative, it's asking us to keep global surface temperature rise down to 1.5 degrees, and to do that, it's taking away the concept of supply chains and linearity, and it's moving farming away from the sharp, lonely, unpleasant end of everything to the centre ground of everything. And what it means is all these players, all these components, they're still important, but we're all on a pathway, we're all on a journey together. And what it means is that under this framework, every one of those players has got to be concerned with reducing emissions. That's the driving force. But the unifying force is this idea of carbon removal, pulling carbon out of the atmosphere and sticking it in the ground. And the only people that can do that are you guys. That is massively empowering, and SBTI has given you that power. It means that the farm can reach out with all the good bits you're doing on sustainability and resilience and biodiversity and human health and well-being and ecosystem service provision and climate change mitigation. But you can also now talk about global cooling and climate reversal. And we can do that through food and drink. And that is massively empowering because it means everybody on the planet can play. And the neat bit about it is, if climate change turns out to be a Chinese hoax, like some US president-elects would suggest it is, if we do engage with this, actually we still all walk away winners. Because the techniques you heard about earlier with regard to regen ag and what it does for soil resilience, biodiversity, the way the whole thing pivots around soil and soil health, it's good for farming, good for biodiversity, good for water, good for food. So there's nothing to fear here. We have a milestone, 50% reduction by 2030, it's zero by 2040, 2050 if we can, the sooner the better. And you might think, look, that's quite a long way off, we don't need to worry about that, do we? Well, as of January of this year, every company incorporated within the European Union has to now report its Scope 3 production emissions. That is set for them to deal with. And their borrowings, their interest rates, their credentials are now at risk if they don't. So it's a really empowering piece. It's not you guys that are going to get thumped with a big stick. It's lots of others. The starting point has to be knowing your carbon numbers. Quick show of hands, how many of you know what your carbon footprint is? Wow. Okay, hopefully some of you are now starting to feel the discomfort I mentioned earlier. You've got to know your numbers. We cannot go into battle on your behalf and ask ordinary people to do extraordinary things to invest in the food you grow if we can't demonstrate the benefits and the capabilities that you already deliver. And the only way to deal with this is through numbers. I've got to tell you, one of the reasons why I stand in front of you today disguised as a much older man. I've been on this carbon journey. I'm in my 5th decade on this carbon journey. I have to tell you this, it is the single most boring topic on the planet. It's so difficult to engage in. And the only way to actually demonstrate capability is through numbers. And I'm going to give you a real live example of that in a second. Okay, very quickly, I'm conscious of time. Very quickly. Building carbon footprints, what's it all about? Think about this. You're growing a crop in a box. What do you need to put into that box to make it grow? All those inputs generate carbon emissions. Some of them are inside the box because of what we do. Some of them are outside the box because people do stuff on our behalf. The outputs, whatever comes out of the box, is going to carry that carbon. And it's going to carry that carbon to everybody else that uses whatever it is you grow and produce at farm level. And that carbon is often referred to as global warming potential. Think about it as a carbon intensity value. It's a Scope 3 production emission. I'm going to share some data now from the Sustainable Futures Programme looking at production emissions. So each one of the dots that's going to appear on the chart here, that's a farm that's done its carbon footprint for a particular crop. We're interested from a supply chains point of view, what's the average value of all that farm activity that's supporting one particular brand? We can report those numbers on a per hectare basis, per ton basis, per calorie basis, whatever it is you want to do in terms of metric. The important bit is we need to understand what's powering that number and how to deal with it. Well, the power, let's have a look. What are the major bits and pieces? Let's expand that for wheat. And let's look at the individual components that might be part of your own farming activities. We use a carbon calculator. We've had some wonderful information about carbon calculators previously. They are running on a lot of different protocols for understanding the inputs and outputs, but this is a particular output looking at the components purely from a production emissions point of view. It's not talking about soil, it's not modeling soil carbon, it's purely looking at what you put in, what you get out. Big bit's nitrogen fertilizer. And you do your carbon reduction strategy, you might say, tell you what, let's cut our nitrogen. That's the big problem. Now, the real issue with this one, we've got to reduce our emissions. There's no two ways about it. We have to do it, and the faster we do it, the better. But emissions reductions is not the same as input reductions. And the challenge we've got in agriculture, and no other industry faces this challenge, if you reduce the inputs that are driving yield, and your yield drops, your carbon emissions per hectare might come down, but your carbon emissions per ton could go up. And that is why French farmers are revolting. Sorry, I should say that better. That is why European farmers are protesting, because they're going to be hit with something called the EU Sustainable Pesticides Directive. And I'm going to give you the numbers behind why these guys are getting twitchy, and I think quite rightly so. We've got to get to net zero. We can't do it by compromising yield or quality or farm performance. The subtext to that, we cannot undermine food security. Population is increasing. When I first joined the planet, farming was feeding 2 people per cropped hectare. Now you're feeding 6. Half the planet only has food to eat because you use synthetic nitrogen. So we've got a real conundrum here in terms of food security and environmental integrity, and we have to solve that particular problem. Okay, what could we do? I'm going to bounce through this because you've had it already today. As an outline, we could look at the bulky organics, biochars, clever stuff moving into organic sources of nutrition. We could get precise with our inputs and make savings there. We could spend a shed load of money on a shiny bit of kit and do some different cultivations. We could manage our straw better. We could play with digital platforms to allow us to manage all the various sources of data that we've got to make us really, really efficient. And you're probably all doing that already anyway. And that's fantastic. And it's not necessarily a climate-driven decision. You might decide to spend £500,000 on a no-till drill and a big tractor on a 1,000-acre arable unit because it pays for itself in terms of fuel savings compared to ploughing. The fact that it actually slows down soil carbon loss and gives you more in terms of soil health, which means your plants grow better on lower inputs, is almost incidental. There's lots you can do to drive the whole story here. But the push you might feel is to reduce your inputs. So I'm going to give you 2 shots on this one. The first is, okay, what would happen if we implement the EU Sustainable Pesticides Directive and cut our active ingredients by half? I'm going to be mean here, I'm going to be unpleasant, and I'm going to show my own data, so I'm asking you to be gentle. My yield curve with different levels of nitrogen, with and without fungicides. Farm best practice, you'll see where we are. We're comfortable at this level of nitrogen. We're comfortable at this level of input for this particular variety. If we cut our fungicides back in accordance with the directive, we drop down the yield curve. And that's really important because when you do your carbon numbers, the carbon number per hectare has gone down. Not by much, but it has. Okay, so we could tick that box and say, brilliant. But because we are now growing less, we've got fewer tons to put that carbon over. Our carbon footprint per ton has now gone up, and our nitrogen use efficiency has taken a real tumble. Okay, so we think we've done the right thing. We've been nudged to do that. We've been encouraged to do that. And in actual fact, it's given supply chains a massive headache. And the story doesn't end there. Assuming supply chains want to remain sustainable and resilient, assuming everybody on the planet wants to be fed, somebody now has got to grow the bit of food that I no longer grow because I've dropped down the yield curve. And that's called displaced carbon. And when we bring that into the equation, my carbon footprint per ton has now gone from 250 to 320, simply because I followed the EU Sustainable Pesticides Directive. You can see why French farmers are revolting. It's a real challenge to income, but it's also a real challenge for all of us. And the people that should be protesting are the people that eat food. Isn't that all of us? Because it affects all of us. It's actually made our impact on the planet bigger. Okay, what can we do to de-risk that? Go through a 2-year, 3-year, 4-year transition period, build resilience into your soil, let the soil lift your yields up on lower inputs. Look at different varieties, look at doing all sorts of clever bits and pieces you're all already engaged in terms of innovation and creativity. But what the message really is, good farming. Good farming, maybe with a slight tweak. That's the way to get out of this. Right, I'm going to give you a sales pitch now. And it's probably going to be the worst sales pitch you've ever had. I'm going to try and encourage you to change your type of fertilizer because I think that would give you the biggest win possible. I'm going to show you some trial results. We've been working on this for a while. This is our wheat response to 3 different types of nitrogen. Now, you're a highly educated, highly specialized audience. I want you to pick which one is the best one for us in terms of our impact on the planet. And you're going to look at that and you're going to go, I can't tell the difference. Performance is about the same, nothing really exciting. So now we get into the audience participation. You shout back at me, show me the money, and I say, not interesting, maybe I can do something a little bit different to get you more encouraged to spend on this particular idea. How about if I add something clever to this fertilizer and make it work a bit better? I'll give you some more numbers. Well, yeah, okay, so performance is up on these fertilizers. Can you now choose which one you should use? I can't, not based on the yield data. The bit I'm going to show you next is totally invisible to you unless you've done your carbon numbers. And if you've got one thing to take away from me today, apart from a headache, it's please do your carbon numbers. They are so important. You'll find out they are not scary. You can do a lot about them and they are really, really valuable. Okay. So the yield won't allow us to look at a difference. We aren't going to say, look, I'm going to invest an extra, whatever it is, per ton on this particular fertilizer. What if you do your carbon footprint, impact on carbon footprint? This is invisible if you don't know your numbers. But simply having a conversation with a fertilizer manufacturer and getting the right stuff on farm could give you the reduction in emissions that SBTi is asking you to deliver by 2030, and you could do it in an afternoon without buying a big shiny bit of kit. Sorry to the big shiny bit of kit that's out there. You might want a big shiny bit of kit later, but very definitely these carbon reductions are real and now, and they're only going to get better. Next year, we're anticipating the introduction of the Carbon Borders Adjustment Mechanism. And that set a price on carbon of £84 and a few pence per tonne of CO2, and that's going to be applied to things like nitrogen that we import into the country. And CBAM, put on ammonium nitrate in a blue bag from Scandinavia, would actually raise its price by about £110 a tonne. But if it looked at a Chinese import, it would raise the price of a Chinese import by £375 a tonne. So it's no longer a cheap import. What does that mean? You're all sitting there thinking, oh God, I'm going to have to pay more for fertiliser. No, not necessarily. Because everybody's looked at Carbon Borders Adjustment Mechanism. They've all gone, we've got to decarbonise or we're going to be out of business. So you're going to start seeing low carbon products at appropriate prices. Now, the company that actually makes the lowest of the carbon impact products here is here today. Go talk to them. Go find out what it's all about. They're actually delivering some really exciting benefits. But no matter how clever we are, no matter how cute we are, we can be as cute as a pet fox in terms of selecting our fertilizer. We've still got a bit of carbon on that board we can't get rid of. What else can we do? We can grow it. We can pull it out of the atmosphere. There's lots of other bits and pieces that we can do in terms of maybe looking at alternate cereals like hybrid rye. We've already heard about growing more grain legumes to take the pressure off imported soy, but that would do the soil the power of good. We can look at cover crops, we can look at intercropping, we can look at all sorts of clever bits and pieces. We can look at functional field margins. What a delight. You want to go insecticide free, play with functional field margins. Brilliant. Quick wrap up in terms of what's going on a practical scale, and I'm going to ask for indulgence from the chairman because I've got a little way to go yet. So big picture. I got involved with a program some years ago, Sustainable Futures, looking at supply chains, Yorkshire Water, looking at water quality. For those of you that have never been, I'm going to show you Yorkshire is on the board here. It's not in red because it's dangerous, it's in red because it's actually got a high nitrate fraction causing a little bit of a problem. You look at the landscape, it's a big landscape with lots of interesting natural and man-made features in it and lots of agriculture. Yorkshire Water could, as far as I'm concerned, have approached the Environment Agency and said, we need some really good, tough regulation. We want to get out in the field, beat these farmers with a stick and say, oi, that's enough, pack it in, or we'll shut you down. They didn't. They chose to collaborate. They chose to go out in the field with Future Foods and say, what is it that's causing the problem? How do we fix it? And the point to it is they put this program of work together, Sustainable Landscapes. It's all about collaboration, not regulation. And it really shows what happens when farmers engage with the process. Really exciting. It's all about demonstrating good techniques at farm level and catching numbers to show you're doing a good job. All right, it's really important. Lots of you are already doing this anyway. We may not be able to back it up. So it was all about focused on nitrates. And the nitrates, that means holding on to water. That means we're going to have an impact on flood risk and soil erosion. That means actually farms are going to hold on to more phosphate and pesticide residue. And pretty soon this whole thing became quite comfortably a soil health program. That's brilliant. It also had a reach. It had a reach beyond the farm. It starts to play with things like food security, sustainability for supply chains, farm performance, impact on food quality. We've already heard about that this morning. Fantastic. Biodiversity and carbon. So one simple premise: what do we do to hold very expensive, very valuable nitrogen in field for farmers? Suddenly delivers a stack of benefits. That's really important. Give you some idea on success. One of the program activities is cover cropping. Yorkshire Water funded the cover crop regime, multi-species mix planted in the gap in the autumn between harvesting one crop and planting another. And the performance on these things, little pop-up rainforests, absolutely incredible, outperforming deciduous woodland in the UK in the time frame that it's there. Really, really stunning. Give you an idea of the engagement piece. So the start point, I'm going to be rude because I'm not from Yorkshire, we put that cover crop out in the ground and there was a lot of it won't work here. You've got an idea that actually we've got issues in Yorkshire that are different to the rest of the world. But what we see is the engagement side of things. It works, it's doing a good job, it's suddenly turning around and making sense, and the farmers have taken it on and made it shine. And that's your power, that's what you contribute in part to this. Really, really exciting stuff. Headline grabbing, from a Yorkshire Water point of view, the performance of these little guys, stunning. You're talking about 30 tonnes fresh weight in 90 days. And in that fresh weight, maybe 100, 120 kilos of nitrogen, 30 kilos of phosphorus that would have left your field, gone into a watercourse. All right? This is why Dutch farmers are being told to stop farming. They're not protecting water. You could deal with that quite comfortably in terms of managing soils, managing crop, looking at the diversity that's going in there. Can we measure success below ground? Absolutely we can. Lovely story with regard to that one. So here's a picture. This is a biomass map for a cover crop. We want to know what soil carbon changes occurred. We're going to put some little dots in there. Now, in the old days, before September 2022, SBTI, you could have been forgiven for going out in the field, taking a handful of soil from each one of those dots, putting it in a bucket, stirring it up, taking a handful of that, getting a soil organic matter test from that, and that's what you're going to base your carbon numbers on. I would say to you that is not adequate. If you're going to look at detecting change in soil, each one of those dots needs its own number. So what do we need to do? We need to engage with some very, very special bits of kit. We've got to put statistics into the mix. We've got to look at what we do in terms of analysis, and we need to be able to repeat that analysis year on year on year. Okay, these guys come out with a coring device, GPS tracked, fractionate the soil, do the bulk density and the organic carbon and the carbon stocks that you already heard Liz talk about earlier. They throw all sorts of other bits and pieces in the mix so that we've got there. What does it look like when it works? That's the data set from three different things: so pasture and plough and regen ag. If we just tidy that one up a wee bit, they're the average values. What are we really looking at? We're looking at a difference between the pasture and the plough. So the pasture's gone into plough for year after year after year. That drop is the carbon that's gone back into the atmosphere. That's bad news, and that relates to all the things that we're worried about in terms of losing carbon. This particular example, about 3 tonnes of carbon per hectare per annum over a long period of time gone from farm up there. If that featured on your carbon audit today, that would be £300 a hectare bill to you for arable farming. So we really need to make sure that stays where it is. The uplift between the other two dots, that's climate smart farming. Pretty small, which is why you need lots of measurements and lots of statistics, but what it's showing is there is an uplift you can detect. That flies in the face of a lot of academic research. You get things like this all the time. This is Rothamsted telling us quite comfortably only 2 months ago it can't be done. Neat bit about it is the soil obviously didn't read that, because it says it can change 3 times faster than the Paris Agreement asks us to change it in order to protect the planet. So when we now look at our carbon roadmap, we can do our emissions reductions, we can look at our removals. That 3 times faster bit means we can put a third in our back pockets to make sure the farm is net zero. We can put a third away for a rainy day as a risk reserve for anything that might change in terms of season. We got a third, if we could certify it, that's a tradable carbon for supply chains. And that's the climate smart way of doing it. Full credit to them. They actually managed to deliver that as a very, very interesting number. I'm just going to bounce through this one and show you what it is they managed to do in terms of permanence and security. This is a lovely little slide, very, very unique data set. Full tribute to the late great Professor, bless you, Stephen Baumoir, bless both of you, and his colleague Nick Nicolaides, looking at where this carbon is partitioned in the soil in the water stable aggregate fraction. This is our pasture-based bit. And you can see where it sits. The important bit's the bit right in the middle, that 250 micron bit. The plough-based bit, it's lost a lot. It's lost a lot of carbon, and it's not very happy at all. And we'll show you that in a second. The climate smart bit has really put back everything we need, and that means it's safe in terms of carbon, it's permanent in terms of carbon storage. That can be certified through the B Carbon scheme, and Climate Smart got the world's first certified high integrity measurements based carbon credits already approved using a very, very stringent protocol, the B Carbon protocol. So a round of applause to them, and they're here today. Last bit. Final slide. I just want to show you so what. The message that often comes back in terms of climate change is that it's the end of the world. And in actual fact, I want to question that. What can we do? What can individuals do through food and drink? The big bit, the really big bit, let's look at an everyday activity like riding a bicycle. And let's look at the carbon that burns from that. And you're all sitting there thinking, this guy is off his trolley. Because riding a bicycle is zero carbon, isn't it? There's no carbon emission here. Well, there is. There's carbon embodied in the manufacture and the maintenance of the bicycle. There's carbon in the energy that drives the bicycle. There's carbon from us because we breathe a little bit heavier. The important bit is, if you want your heart to beat, you've got to put some sort of fuel in the biological fuel tank. That's what you guys do. You make biological fuel, right? So it's food choices. What is it we actually put in that biological fuel tank? What does it do? Does it make a difference? Okay, I've already said this before, but you're a highly specialized audience. You're here for a purpose. Part of that purpose is food and impact of food on climate. Knowing what you know about food, this is your, no pun intended, bread and butter. Knowing what you know about food, pick the one on that board that would give you the biggest carbon footprint. Tell me the one I should avoid if I want to save the planet. Let me help you. Bless you. The carbon values per kilo of food. You might look at those and say, hang on a minute, cheese, bacon, big numbers, better avoid them. Let's see if that's true. Let's actually roll that out with regard to impact on riding a bicycle. Same carbon burn in the bicycle. No two ways about it. We're not changing the bicycle. We're going to be following standard scientific method. Respiration carbon, pretty much the same, independent of the food groups. It's the food group that makes the difference. That screen's not big enough to show the tomato bar. The tomato bar needs actually 3 more screens to get to the end. Put it in context, if you chose to take a bus, a train, a car or a plane, they would be your average carbon emissions per kilometre travelled. Have a look at the rice, a rice-powered bicycle, and there are hundreds of millions of them on the planet, generates a carbon footprint similar to a small family car. And it doesn't matter whether that car is diesel, petrol, electric, hybrid or hydrogen, because the embodied carbon in the manufacture and operation is pretty similar for those until they've gone about 60 to 70,000 miles. Look at cheese, look at dairy. There's a big media campaign at the moment. Let's decarbonise, let's get rid of dairy cows. Methane is terrifying. 1 hectare of rice generates as much methane as 3 dairy cows. Where's the media storm on rice, and why aren't you banging that drum? It's really important to be able to defend what you do effectively. Now, it doesn't really matter because we can decarbonise rice just as fast as we can decarbonise dairy, and all those numbers have got to get to zero. The important thing is I'm not telling you not to eat things. I'm not saying don't eat tomatoes. I'm saying use your food spend wisely. You're going to put your hand in your pocket and put hard-earned cash across a counter. You need to know you're doing some good. If I buy out-of-season, organic, specialist tomatoes and go ride my bicycle, I'm generating a carbon footprint 3 times greater than if I took a private jet to the supermarket. If we can make informed choices, we can solve this crisis of climate simply by eating and drinking the right stuff. I'm well over time. I'm sorry. There's loads more I'd love to tell you. You've been a fantastic audience. I will be back a little bit later. I'm sorry I've cut into time. I really apologise. I love it.
Thank you very much, Neil. Wow, there was so much information in there in terms of stats and figures and little quips as well. So thank you so much for that information and that presentation. If you have any questions, as I say, please do keep hold of them. And once Janet has spoken, we'll be able to have a panel Q&A. So our next speaker is Janet Hughes. So Janet is the visionary leading DEFRA's transformative farming and countryside programme. Today, Janet is going to talk about ELMS, the Environmental Land Management Scheme, and the opportunities for farmers. I do know that Janet is passionate about collaborating and finding solutions, so we're really pleased to welcome Janet to the stage today.
I love that photo. It was taken before I started this job when I still had brown hair. It's all gone now. Thank you very much for having me here today. It's a great delight to be here in the snow. It's not snowing where I come from, down south. I'm here to talk about what we're trying to do in government with the Farming Reform Programme and where we're up to and what you can expect next. And I really look forward to your questions, and I'll be around afterwards if you want to talk to me and ask me questions. And if you don't get a chance to do that, I'm dead easy to track down on the internet, so feel free to hunt me down. I'm always keen to hear from farmers. What we're trying to do in the programme that I'm responsible for is 3 things all at the same time that haven't been done before. We're trying to maintain domestic food production and support that, and as has been said this morning, that is your primary purpose if you're a farmer, and we very deeply respect and appreciate and value that. The second thing we're trying to do is improve farming productivity and business profitability overall on average. And that's very important for the resilience of the sector and for you to be able to run profitable businesses and have a livelihood, which is also a completely reasonable thing for you to want to do, and we very deeply respect and value that too. But the third thing we're also trying to do is to improve the outcomes in the countryside for climate, water quality, biodiversity and air quality at the same time as supporting food production and productivity. And as we've been hearing this morning, we believe and we know that there is evidence to suggest that those things can be done together, and not just that, they must be done together. If you want to have a resilient business over time and resilient and profitable food production over time, we need to take care of the environment that produces that food. We need water, we need biodiversity, we need pollinators, etc. So we're trying to pursue all of these things that must go hand in hand, and we're trying to do that in what we know is an incredibly, incredibly volatile and challenging context for all of you. As we can see, if we simply look out of the window at the weather and we look at what the weather's been doing over the winter, you are all, and as we've just been discussing, you're all facing the impacts of climate change whilst simultaneously being blamed for it and asked to solve it. And we know that your price volatility for both input and output prices has been off the charts in the last couple of years in particular. And obviously we are undertaking the biggest change to farming policy and the way that we make use of the farming budget for generations. And we know that that context means that what we've got to do to make this work is work with farmers and design and deliver these reforms with farmers, because if what we're doing doesn't work for you, then it doesn't work at all. There's no point, literally no point, in me and my colleagues designing a beautiful theoretical set of schemes if none of you find them attractive enough to take part in them, because literally nothing will happen if we do that. So the most important thing I've got to do on any given day is talk to you and hear about what's going on for you, what's it going to take to make this a success, and we have been doing that with thousands of farmers over recent years. And what we're trying to put in place basically is three main things. First of all, we're trying to improve our services for you so that you can have a business-like relationship with us, you can have confidence in us, you can not expect us to turn up on your farm with a clipboard or a tape measure and then fine you unfairly for things that aren't even your fault or don't even matter. But instead that you should get payments on time, we should process your business in a timely and professional way, and you should be able to have a business-like relationship with us like you would with anybody else that you're interacting with, your vet, your agronomist, or whoever else that you're working with. And we want you to see us like you see those people who are here to help you to succeed and know what we're doing and can help you to have a profitable business that produces food that the country needs and also steward the environment as farmers have been doing for hundreds of years, we know. So the first thing we're doing is improving our services, and that covers both regulation and environmental land management schemes. And if you've had a visit, because they're not inspections anymore, from an RPA officer or another officer in recent years, you will, I hope, have started to see that shift. And when you do, it's not a freak occurrence, as I know lots of farmers think when they have somebody visit and it turns out that they're pragmatic and sensible. It's not a freak occurrence. We're doing it on purpose, and you should be seeing that universally all the time, increasingly as we move forward. But we're also simplifying our environmental land management schemes so that they're no longer a niche sport for people who are particularly passionate about the environment, but a mainstream activity that makes good business sense for you to do, both in the short, medium, and long term. And it's easy for you to do, no unnecessary bureaucracy, no unnecessary risk, but a sensible business decision for you. So I like to say, by the way, I'm not claiming we've done that yet fully, but we have made a lot of progress in the last couple of years. And I'm just going to run through some of the things that we've already done and are in place that you may or may not be aware of, and what's coming next. And you're more than welcome to challenge me on the stage or after about all the things that remain to be done. I'm very well aware that there's quite a lot, and we're not there yet, and it's not certainly far from perfect. But I do want you to know we shall not rest until that's done, because it matters, doesn't it? It's for you and for our country that we get this right. So the other two things that we improve our services and make them work. We're delivering a range of environmental land management schemes, and those are schemes which pay you to do the sorts of stuff you've just been hearing about. The big mainstream offer is the Sustainable Farming Incentive, and that pays you to do things in the course of your farming which can help you to optimize your use of inputs, take care of your soil, take care of watercourses at the same time as farming. So we're not asking you to choose between farming and nature. We're asking you to undertake methods of farming, which many farmers, many of you will be doing already, which take those things hand in hand in a mutually reinforcing way. So, for example, if you optimize your nutrients, you will save money, you will reduce your carbon emissions, and you will have a positive impact on biodiversity and water quality. And that's the sweet spot that SFI is trying to operate in. We had a pilot for SFI, which is coming towards its end this year, over 3 years. We had just 850 farmers involved in that, and we had an early version of SFI, which we rolled out in 2022. And we said we were going to test and learn, and boy, did we learn from those experiences. And we learned that we needed more flexibility, a wider range of choices, and better prices, and we needed to really make sure that the things we were asking you to do are actually workable in a farm context, knowing that no two farms are the same. So we can't be writing detailed prescriptions from our office and expecting that to work all over the country. What we say instead now is we'd like you to have, for example, winter cover so that you don't have bare soil over winter. And we want you to have at least a couple of species in there. You work out which species, when to sow them, and how to manage them to achieve that aim. Rather than, please sow this specific mix on this specific date, which, as we all know, probably won't work just in one farm in different bits of the farm, never mind all the farms in the country. So we reinvented SFI last year to make it more flexible, introduce a wider range of choices, and we've increased the prices now 3 years running to keep them up to date and make sure that they are attractive. And as a result, we're now into 5 figures of numbers of farmers that have applied for SFI, and the applications we've had just in the first 4 months of that offer are worth more than £200 million to farmers, and they cover more than 1 million hectares of land. And we're seeing farmers coming into a wide range of actions in the scheme. We're seeing farmers from all over the country, all different types of farmers and sizes of farmers and tenancies. We're really delighted to see that. That's much better than we were seeing in our early offer and suggests we're beginning to go in the right direction. But we've got more to come, and I'll come on to that shortly this year. But if you haven't taken a look at SFI, or you looked at it 2 or 3 years ago and you thought, nah, that's a bit too restrictive, I'm not interested in all that, have another look, because it's now much more flexible. It's open for applications. We're turning around applications in very short periods of time. We used to turn them around in 7 months, and then you would wait another 6 to 12 months for a payment. We're now turning around applications in days, not months, and you get your first you start the following month when you accept your agreement, and you get paid 3 months after that. So it's a bit more of a business-like proposition, and the cash flow is much better for farmers. So take a look. It's open now, but there is more coming this summer. So currently, there's 23 actions you can get paid for in that scheme. This summer, we're going to merge it with the Countryside Stewardship mid-tier scheme. So instead of having 2 different schemes you've got to navigate, we'll just have one big offer with everything in one place, all on the same sorts of flexible terms and conditions as SFI, and there'll be a whole load more actions at that stage. But don't wait for that. The cash is on the table now. You can come in now, and you can add those new things in later if that's what you want to do. So please don't wait. At the moment, I've got cover to have no limit on what you can do in SFI and no limit on the number of farmers that can come in. So have at it and give us the problem of there being too many. And ministers have said that publicly, but I won't get away with that forever. So please come in right now, and then you can add more stuff later on. So that's SFI. Countryside Stewardship, as you'll be aware, mid-tier has been around for some time. We've been trying to simplify and improve that scheme. We've got now more than twice as many farmers in it as we had 3 years ago, and we want that to carry on. And like I say, what we're going to do with that is, the main focus on that is get more actions in there that work for more farmers, sort out the prices so that they're fair and reasonable and attractive, but also make it less bureaucratic, so you don't have separate mid-tier and SFI schemes. They're all part of the same offer, and you can just manage it all in one place. It's straightforward. You don't have to pay someone to understand the ridiculousness of the bureaucracy that surrounds it. You can just do it yourself in a straightforward way, or your agent can if that's how you prefer to operate. And there'll be more actions coming into mid-tier this year. And then the third scheme, which is more of interest to a smaller number of people, but very deeply, is landscape recovery. And that's for larger scale land use, conservation, restoration, whatever you want to call it. Some people don't like restoration as a word and find it offensive, so let's pretend I didn't say that. Large-scale work to enhance the environment alongside food production. And that is competitive rounds of application for funding over, say, a 20-year period. Usually involves groups of farmers working together, and they're doing, generally speaking, more extensive grazing types of farming, but there is some arable mixed in there too. And we're really delighted to see how many groups of farmers are working together in that, and the power of those clusters, if they work for you, is really fantastic. So you've got SFI, that's our mass market offering, and you're now in danger of missing out. So you've reached the stage where we've got all the early adopters in, and everyone else needs to get on board. And we've got Countryside Stewardship, and we've got landscape recovery. If you're in HLS, there's a few thousand farmers still in HLS, and we're trying to make it much easier for you to move into the new offer. People who are in that scheme were saying a year or two ago, oh, we're fine where we are, thanks, lads. We don't fancy all this new stuff until we see how it pans out. They're now seeing that the new offer is better than where they were, and they want to move across. And if you're in that situation, contact the RPA. And we're trying to make it as smooth as possible for you to do that. So that's the environmental land management schemes. We're trying to get 70% of land and 70% of farmers into those schemes by 2028. We're approaching half now. So we're not too bad, actually, but we do want more people in. And about 40% of those coming into SFI are currently not in a scheme and are finding that they can come in and they can find things to do, and they can find ways to, crucially, incorporate this stuff into the farm business and manage it in a way that is actually going to work for you, for food production, for your business, and for the environment. And then the third aspect of what we're doing, we've got services, we've got our environmental and management schemes. The third aspect is our grants, where we're offering capital investment, usually in the form of match funding, to support investment in slurry management, in animal health and welfare, in innovation, research and development, and that includes inventing stuff, but also, crucially, taking it through the stages it needs to go through to get it to scale as quickly as possible. And I mentioned animal health and welfare. And there is some complexity in our grants offer, I know, and one of the things we've been working on is how we can simplify and streamline that, so you don't need to learn some ridiculous load of lexicon of policy nonsense that me and my friends have made up, and instead you can just go online and find stuff that you want in actual English. So that's a work in progress. We're doing better on that now, and there'll be more leaps on that in the next year or so, and I'm really sorry for the complexity in the meantime. Turns out, you would think that would be easy to solve, wouldn't you? Turns out nothing in the civil service is easy to solve at all. But we're doing our best and we're making progress. So in terms of what's coming, we've got the new actions that I mentioned coming in the schemes. We've got about 50 new actions coming over the next year or two in the schemes, paying for more things to do with water quality, peatland restoration, and various other actions. And we published some information about that in January. So that was under Agriculture Transition Plan Update on the internet. But if you just search for environmental land management schemes, you'll find that. Or hit me up after and I'll tell you where to find it. We've got better prices. We've got premium prices for some of our actions now, where we don't yet see enough uptake and we really want to see more. So, for example, some of our water body buffering actions, that might be your most productive land, and we need to pay you better. If we want you to have a margin next to your water course, and that's very productive, we need to pay a decent price to encourage you to do that. So there's now some premium prices available, and they're starting to look much more attractive. And as I say, we're introducing more flexibility into schemes, so you don't have to decide at the beginning of a 10-year agreement or a 5-year agreement everything you're going to do, and then you're stuck. There's much more flexibility now to add things in as you go year by year, because farmers told us that's what they wanted to do. I met a farmer who is big into schemes, and he was saying he's only going to have 3 chances in his whole career of being the main person on the farm to decide what to put in schemes, because he's done 10-year agreements. It's completely mad. He thinks about his farm plan every single year, and he's constantly improving it, but we only let him do it every 10 years, so we're not doing that anymore. You can change it every year. Things we're keeping an eye on, so you know, we're keeping an eye on uptake in general and how this is actually working for people, and we listen very eagerly to feedback all the time, as I hope you can see from the last couple of years and the way we have flexed and adapted. We also take very seriously the need not to have complete chaos and change things every 5 minutes. And I know there's been a lot of change in the last couple of years. That was necessary to make things better, because if we want them to be better, we are going to have to change them. But we know we've got to now get to a period of much more clarity, stability, and planning ahead, so you can see what's on the table, and then we evolve it year by year in a way that is much more controlled within some kind of confines, and you can have confidence in it. We're looking at small farms, because they don't tend to be very highly represented in schemes. We're seeing more of them now, because you get a management fee to take part in SFI, where you just get paid to take part, and that covers some of the costs of just doing business and being in a scheme. We're really interested in tenants and the impacts of these schemes on tenant farmers. We've made the schemes much more attractive to tenants by flexing the terms and conditions to make it possible to come in. I know there's a lot of worry in the sector at the moment about the possibility of particularly big estates taking land fully out of production and turfing tenants off the land. We're not seeing a lot of that yet in the data, but we do recognise the risk, and it's something we're watching very closely. And that's the sort of thing where this is all about tweaking the dials over time to make sure we've got it calibrated just right, because we want the prices to be high enough to be attractive, but we don't want them to be so attractive that everybody just thinks, oh, I won't bother producing food then, because we do actually need you to do that. So we've got to make this a kind of optimised thing, and we'll keep an eye on that. We're looking at the spread of actions that are undertaken, because we do need to see a certain quantity of action in relation to water quality and biodiversity. And what we're looking at there is how can we inform farmers and incentivise you and reward you if you take combinations of actions that are really going to make an impact. So you'll see more of that. We're looking at different types of farms to make sure this is attractive in the uplands and in the fens, and here in Lincolnshire for you, big arable and livestock operations. We want to make sure this works for everybody. And if you've been thinking in the past, oh, I'm basically a fully commercial food operation, this is not for me, have another look, because there's loads of in-field actions that can help de-risk the adoption of the sorts of farming methods that we were just talking about before. So if you're thinking, maybe I should think about how I'm using some of these different methods of farming, but it's a bit risky, that's what these payments are for, to help you make that transition. So it's much more a commercial sort of proposition these days. And we're really interested to see how our flexibility is working, particularly in a context where everybody's worried about getting fined for minor transgressions, because in that context, flexibility in a scheme looks quite risky, doesn't it? Because you think, well, where's the secret rules then, and am I going to get fined or not? And that's why the flexibility in the scheme has to be coupled with the improvements to controls, and we've got to keep an eye on both of those and make sure that they're working for you, and that you can see that we are serious about this. We are absolutely not mucking about when we say, we're not trying to catch you out by saying, oh, here's some flexibility, ha-ha, we caught you. I don't really want to get out of bed to do that, and neither do any of my colleagues. So we're looking at all those things so that we can achieve large-scale uptake of these actions that we want to see to support water quality, biodiversity, and food production and farm productivity at scale and at the right level of ambition to achieve genuine, meaningful impacts on biodiversity and climate, in line with all the things that we've just been hearing about this morning in terms of the targets that we've got to achieve for the country. And given that farmers are stewards of 70% of the land, we need you to do this work, and if we want you to do this work, we need to pay you for it, and we need to make it work for you, and that's what we're all about. So, if you haven't been involved yet, what the hell have you been doing? Come and find me, hunt me down, and I'll tell you how. We always want to know if it's not working for you, I want to know why, and then we'll try and fix it. You don't all agree with each other, funnily enough, so we can't do absolutely everything everybody wants, but we do listen very intently, and we're constantly adapting, and that is the route to success, we think, in making this work. So I hope that's a helpful update. Do keep in touch. And as I say, I'm dead easy to track down, and I look forward to the questions and discussion. Thanks. So on here.
this microphone. Neil, do you want to come up onto stage? Are you coming up as well? Brilliant. Thank you so much. You've actually saved Neil by getting some time back there, Janet. So Neil can thank you later. Okay, there was lots of information there, both from Neil and from Janet, and I'm sure there'll be lots of questions. So if you want to pop your hand up, Charles is roaming around with the microphone. Paul.
Good afternoon. Great presentations, everybody. Thank you very much. Where do you and Neil see government involvement with both climate-friendly farming in the next 5 to 10 years, which may also include possible regulation of carbon credit schemes?
Do you want to go first?
I can do. From my point of view, the driving force actually is much more on the voluntary side, and it's supply chain driven. So you're looking at the initiatives that are coming from major brands of food and drink that are realizing they've got to decarbonize if they want to put their stuff on a supermarket shelf, and they're the ones that are actually driving this at this point in time. Water authorities doing the same sort of thing. The government side of things, I think the watching brief would be they can really, really support farms during transition. One of the big things we put up on the screen here, the Yorkshire Water Driven Sustainable Landscapes Programme, because Yorkshire Water funded the cover cropping incentive and delivered on payments for soil analysis, remote sensing, all the good bits to make sure farmers were doing the right thing, it seriously de-risked the transition that farmers went from, we're going to do what we always do, to doing something slightly different. And I think that is where government fits in really nicely, that the sustainable farming incentive is a transition support mechanism as far as I'm concerned, and we will deliver some serious benefit to food, to farming, to the environment if we can ease that transition.
I think that's right. A couple of things I would add. That's exactly what the point of those sorts of schemes is. And our expectation over the next 5 to 10 years, obviously we're expecting some politics to happen over the next year. And I work for whoever the government of the day is, and I'm loyal to whoever it is at the time that they're the government. That's how it works if you're a civil servant. And whoever it is that's in government, what our expectation is they will want to continue with this approach, broadly speaking, and the debate is about how much money you're going to put into it, how good is it going to be, who's going to do the best job, rather than is this generally a good idea or not. There's nobody saying it's not a good idea. The other things the government can help with, though, that we haven't mentioned are the kind of way we want to approach this is there's a huge role here for the private markets, and one of the things that we often do in the civil service is destroy those things before they get off the ground by having too many rules and getting involved too much and thinking it's all about us, and it isn't actually. So part of what we need to do is leave the right space for that to develop and make sure what we're developing in our schemes is complementary to the private markets and not competing with it. That's not what we're for. We're here to fill gaps and be complementary and pursue government objectives in the context of that market. But then there is a role for government in helping make sure that there are clear rules for the game. Yeah. So I've often heard it said, well, this market's a complete Wild West. How do I know I'm not going to get screwed over 5 years down the line? Which tool should I use? How do I know it's credible? And those are the sorts of things we can help with. And we think that needs to be done internationally. And so there are teams in DEFRA, I don't lead them, but we do work closely with them, who are working in relation to the setting of standards for this and the setting of the rules of the game. And that's where we think government can really help to make this a kind of safe, credible thing that could actually take off.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's really reassuring. I mean, we've been developing these sort of new carbon capture schemes and things like that. I think it's hugely important that farmers have new income streams over the next few years to fund the sort of transitions to some of these new farming systems. And it's assuring that DEFRA are prepared to accept them as on top of SFI, and certainly I think that will certainly help encourage farmers, incentivise farmers to take up more sort of carbon-friendly farming.
Yeah, and the rules in SFI are that you can have private funding on top of it if that's what you want to do. Yeah. We have said we have to keep that under review over time, and we will, because nobody in the market wants to pay for something that somebody else is already paying for. So we've got to make sure that we're really clear what we're paying for, and that can sit nicely next to private investment. But what we don't want to do is have loads of really onerous rules right now that depress uptake of all of these different things, and the whole thing doesn't take off, and you don't get to see any of that money on either side of the fence. So it's one for us to keep under review.
Thank you. I do appreciate we've been joined by a third person on the stage, and you may all be wondering who the heck it is. So, could I just ask you to introduce yourself, just so that...
Hello, my name's Paul Rhodes. I'm a Director of Future Food Solutions, and we've been working with Neil for about 10 years, working with groups of farmers up and down the country, both in the UK, Ireland, and also currently in the US, looking to develop more sustainable farming systems, working with brands and also working with water companies across geographical areas to encourage the uptake of more sustainable farming systems.
Perfect, thank you. Just for any confusion out there. Any more questions from the floor, please? We have got, obviously Janet here. It would be fantastic to explore conversations further. Great opportunity for you, and to have then that practical backup from Neil as well.
Hello, question for Janet, please. I'm looking at a biodiversity net gain scheme to create some credits on grassland by a river where there's currently a flooding problem. To what extent can I use FSI and ELMS and create credits, or am I barred from going into any of those schemes? Thank you.
So the rules in thanks for the question. The rules in SFI are that you can have private schemes on top of SFI. So we'll pay you to take the actions, and then you can get paid for the outcomes by somebody else. What I don't run is all of those other schemes. And so that's why it's a complex... These biodiversity net gain and carbon schemes are nascent and are developing over time, and they will each also have their own rules. So you need to check the rules of those schemes, and we're keeping an eye on that because we don't really want them to say... We don't want them to be mutually exclusive. We want you to be able to do all of them. But certainly for the bits I'm responsible for, you can have at it, crack on, you can do both.
Thank you. Next question,
but
please.
But do check, for the other schemes, check their rules, because I can't tell you what the rules are of all the different things that you're taking part in, just to be really clear about that.
Yeah, and I think for the future, the opportunities are going to be looking at all of those rules and regulations to look at how we can, as I said at the beginning, sort of stack, bundle and sequence to make sure that we can achieve our aims and ambitions in terms of the targets and also food production, but also return profit and profitability, sustainability for the businesses. Any more questions?
Just one thing to mention, in terms of difference between government schemes and these markets that we're talking about, is that in government schemes, what you get paid for is to take action, which on average can be expected to have good results. I don't care if you're maintaining something that's already great, or adding, or both, whereas often in the marketplace, what you're paying for is net gain. So you might be somebody that's already got fantastic levels of carbon sequestration on your farm or biodiversity or whatever, will pay you to maintain it. So it might, depending on where you are in your particular journey, different types of payment are going to make more or less sense to you. So that's the sequencing point is really important on that as well, I think.
Yeah, just following up on that, just a question to all three of you. Neil, you mentioned about the stacking of opportunities, and you neatly showed that on one of your slides. And so we're not looking at food or biodiversity environmental protection. We're looking at how we can really integrate that approach. So from your experience, just wondering what are the biggest barriers and the biggest challenges that you're seeing on the ground for people not embracing that for the future? And then coming to Janet, do you truly believe that we can achieve an integrated approach that you mentioned in your presentation?
Thank you. I think the barriers would be nervousness about doing something new. We may not have the experience or the skill set. It may be agriculture is a very conservative, traditional kind of industry. It may be that we're a little bit afraid of taking the first step into doing something different. Leave the plough in the shed and go no-till drilling. We had a crop disaster and all our neighbours are going to say, why on earth did you do that? Because the plough works, doesn't it? So there's a little bit of technical knowledge gap, confidence. Also a little bit of, why should I do this? Who's going to pay me to do this? Some of the farms' early adopters have done it because they believed it was the right thing to do. They're now finding that actually there are rewards that allow them to do that. The other thing is, and it's a little bit like having a conversation with my sat-nav, when we go on the transition to regen ag, a lot of people will rush out and buy a no-till drill. My sat-nav would say, you really don't want to start from here. If you want to go on the journey, let's get the foundations right first. And it might be you want to do 2 or 3 years of cover cropping in that autumn gap where you've harvested your cereals, you've got an autumn gap before a spring crop, put in a cover crop, and see the benefits, see the soil structural change, the water change, the lower structural fraction when you come to establishing the next crop, so it's easier to actually get the crop up in the ground. Get a bit of residual nitrogen out of the legumes that might be in that cover crop. You get a bigger, better crop the next year. There's your confidence, and then you build on that one.
Yeah, and that's the sort of thing we'll pay you for in SFI.
Yeah.
So go and have a look. In terms of the barriers, from what we understand from all of our engagement with farmers, what farmers need to see is that it stacks up from a money perspective, but that's only first base. Second base is not undue risk to the business, either because we're going to come and fine you for doing it wrong, or because you're going to risk your yield or your profit or your business going forward for whatever sort of consequence. Thirdly, it's got to be seen as good business practice, not some sort of hippie sideshow, and that's a kind of critical mass thing. Nobody wants to have a farm which everybody and their neighbours thinks looks like a right mess, because it's not really accepted practice to leave stubble in the ground over winter, for example. So we need to, that's a sort of business practice, and we're seeing, I think, in the last couple of years even, just in the industry, the sort of courage we now see of regenerative type practices and people winning prizes for doing this sort of integrated approach. I think the dial's starting to move on that. Yeah. And then finally, farmers need to see results. Both for the soil, you need to see when you've done that cover cropping, it is actually better. And also when you start seeing more wildlife on your farm and you start seeing the impact, that's when we see farmers really go, I want to go after this. I've got my heart now as well as my mind, and I'm really going to go for it. So you've got to have all those things in place.
Absolutely.
And in terms of, is it really possible? Well, yes, because I've seen it on loads of farms. There are plenty of farmers doing these sorts of things and showing how it can be done on heavy ground, on light ground, up the hill, down the hill, small scale, large scale. They're all doing it differently. And events like this are really helpful for people to learn from each other, aren't they? And that's what farmers really prefer. So funnily enough, I always ask farmers, where do you look for advice? And where do you look for kind of inspiration and confidence? And do you want to guess how many have told me DEFRA is the answer to that? Not that many. People want to know from other farmers, don't they? So I think, like, get on the WhatsApp groups, get to the events like this. You're all doing that already, and that's where you find out whether it's really possible. But I've certainly seen with my own eyes what's possible, and that's what I'm trying to enable everybody else to do.
Brilliant job.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the programs that we've been running are very much about farmers learning from farmers and trying stuff on farm. Let's try some stuff. Let's see if it works. We collect data and evidence that gives them, a chance to not only, cover crops. Everybody knew what the cost of a cover crop was, but nobody would actually tell you what the value is. And we've been able to, over thousands of different data sets, show the real value of what a cover crop can do, both in terms of preventing leaching of nitrates and phosphates, but also in terms of carbon capture. And that's hugely valuable, so that to make those informed decisions. And as I say, working with neighbours, collaborating as well in the supply chain, and a lot of the programmes have either been funded by water companies or brands who are determined to improve the sustainability of their supply chain. We can make a difference. And I think SFI is a great opportunity to de-risk some of the things that I think we need to do. And we wholeheartedly are encouraging people to take that on and work further with us.
Great, thank you. Before I hog the questions, is there any more from the floor? Thank you.
Question for Janet, really. Janet, you mentioned merging countryside stewardship schemes with SFI. Is that current schemes, or will that be new CS schemes?
What we're going to do is so from this summer, if you want to do any of the actions that are currently in mid-tier or SFI, or the new actions that would go into those schemes, then you will come into a combined offer. And you'll go online and you'll see it all in one place. From that point forward, all new agreements will be there, and they will then have access to some of the benefits of SFI, like 3-year actions, quarterly payments, some of the more flexible terms and conditions for tenants, and the flexible prescriptions. If you're already in a CS mid-tier scheme, we've said what we're expecting is, and we're already getting people saying, well, I want to move on to this new thing, which is great news, because that suggests that we're going in the right direction. What we're working on is how to make that as smooth as possible for you. So if you're in that situation, what you can do is you can have a new agreement alongside your existing agreement if you want to. So if there's some actions that you're not currently doing which are now available in SFI, that's fine. You can combine the two together. And we've got about 40% of the people coming into SFI have got a CS agreement already, and they're stacking SFI on top. So you can do that in the short term. And then as and when you want to transfer onto the new scheme, onto the new combined offer, whether that's at the end of your agreement or earlier than that for whatever reason, then you can do that. You just need to contact the RPA. It will most likely be at your anniversary in your CS agreement, so you contact the RPA in good time if that's something that you want to be able to do. And what we're trying to do is just make this as least of a pain as possible for you all. There will be a little bit of pain in the transition. It's unavoidable, but we really want it to be smooth for you because we don't want anybody to drop out because of crappy bureaucracy. That, like, if you've made a business decision and you don't want to do something, that's fine, but if we've put you off by making something a pain for you, that's not good. So we want to make that as smooth as possible.
Thanks, Janet. Next question, please. One right at the back, Charles. Thank you. You should be used to this running, Charles.
Another question for Janet. As the more farmers join the scheme, is there going to be a limit or a cap on the funding that will be available?
So at the moment, what the government have said is a really good question. At the moment, what the government said is that they will maintain the farming budget in England, because it does apply to England only, because farming is devolved, at £2.4 billion a year on average, and that's what we're doing over this Parliament. It will be for the next government to decide what the size of the budget is. We expect it to be broadly in line with what we have now, but the part of the political debate for the election is how big should it be. So vote for whoever you think is going to do whatever it is that you want to do on that and everything else, obviously. At some point, we're going to come to a position where we have to optimise how we spend that budget, because it's not limitless. That's not this year, but it will come at some point. What we want to do is deal with that not by saying, oh, sorry, the gate's now down, but by optimising the funding for new people coming in, so that we make sure that we can let people in, but the range of things that you do might adjust over time for new entrants coming in each year. So we want to manage that in as fair and inclusive a way as possible, so everybody can do as much as possible of what they want to do, but it is a cake and it has limits, and we can slice it up in different ways, but eventually we will hit limits. That's why I'm saying, as of right now, you can do what you want in SFI. There's no limit on how many can come in or what you can do when you're in. And once you've got a contract, you've got a contract. So crack on now, and then you can add things in later on if you want certainty that you're going to get the funding over the next 3 years. Then go and apply this afternoon. It's dead easy. Do it online.
The other element that you mentioned as well, Janet, was actually talking about stability and the requirement for stability, and actually to ride volatility roller coasters that potentially political changes can bring. And that's what the industry really does need, is that clarity and that stability to be able to plan for the future.
Yeah, absolutely. We really recognise that. I think this is everything we do in my team is about balancing things just right. So we've got to make some change, because otherwise we can't make things better. But we've got to make just the right amount of change, so we make things better and we don't create too much chaos and make it all too unstable for you. And last year and this year are the peak years of change, where we're doing wholesale redesign stuff, roll out new things, try things, run experiments, etc. We're coming to the period this summer now where we've got the next big introduction of lots of new actions. Beyond that, what we've said is we're going to go into a period where we have a much more structured ongoing review of the schemes. So each year we'll review a third of the actions and see, should we still offer them? If so, should they change? Have we learned something about how these work for farmers? Should we update them? Should we update the prices? And that'll be on an ongoing rolling basis. So it just carries on, evolving and improving in a stable, orderly way, because the worst thing to do would be to have all this change and then stop and leave it. Because if we do that, the second you do that, in the same way that if you decided you now know how to farm and you're never going to learn anything again, you would begin to degrade your understanding of best practice, wouldn't you? So it's got to be constantly evolving, but in a more sort of incremental way. Obviously, there'll be changes of government, and what we're trying to, and changes of priority within governments based on all sorts of factors. And what we've got to do, what we see ourselves as doing here, is trying to create a self-improving system that can flex, a bit like a tall building. They're not rigid, they flex in the wind, and that's how they stay standing. And so it's got to be recognisable as that same building, but flex. I don't know if those metaphors work for you. It really works for me and my team to think about it in that way.
Yeah.
Thank you, Janet. Next question, please. There's just one down here, Charles.
Angus Gowthorpe, farming up at York.
Hi, Angus.
Hi, Janet, how are you doing? Myself and I know quite a few others are trying to get ourselves out of the mid-tier scheme on our renewal this January. We're all struggling with RPA doing that. If we're not allowed to leave until maybe next January or this summer, whenever that may be, we might well end up with 2-3 SFI agreements on our farm, because we might well have one to replace the mid-tier agreement, one with the new options we can start now, and one with the new options that come out this coming summer, hopefully. Will there be the possibility of amalgamating all those so they have one single finish date?
Yes, that's the plan. So we think most people would prefer to have a single agreement which you can adjust over time. Apparently, if you have a satellite telly thing, I don't, but that's what you do with those. You can add in Sky Sports for the duration of the World Cup and then bin it off after, that kind of thing. So it's like that, except we don't want you to bin things off in a casual way. So you can add things in, you can extend it, etc. over time. We think most people would like that, but we don't want to assume everybody would, because there are circumstances in which people do want different agreements at different times for different purposes. So, for example, maybe the landlord has an agreement to do some stuff and the tenant has an agreement to do another. So what we're trying to get to is, if you want a single agreement, you will be able to merge everything into that single agreement in a smooth way. If you want to have separate agreements for some reason, that's also fine. In the same way, having 3-year agreements is great if what you're doing is dipping your toe in, or you're on a tenancy or whatever. But actually, if you want longer term certainty, that's not great. So we're looking at introducing optionality there to say, well, do you want it to be 3 years? That's the minimum, or would you prefer it to be 5 or even longer? So it's about making it possible for you to do it in as streamlined a way as possible, but not requiring everyone to do that on an assumption that's what they like. So I would say in the short term, if you can live with it, have your separate agreements for now, and then we'll move to a more streamlined approach. Just so you know, we did have a meeting earlier this week, Paul Caldwell, the Chief Executive of the RPA, and I with our teams to say, we haven't got this right yet in terms of people moving from CS into SFI. We've got people saying it's not working as well as it should for them. What do we need to do about that? So you've got a deep dive going on about that now to see, can we fix it for people who are in that situation right now and make it better?
Great, thank you very much. Whilst you're all thinking of another question, I'm going to pose one to both of you, if that's okay. It's said that land use in the UK is on the cusp of change not seen since the 18th century land clearances. And certainly, Neil, you talked about productivity, and DEFRA stats show that for last year, for example, the area of productive land decreased by 3%, but productivity increased by 5%. So looking at it from your perspective, how can we really focus on productivity, potentially on a smaller area of land? And Janet, from a DEFRA perspective, what is the objective from DEFRA in terms of supporting productivity for the future?
Brilliant, thank you. From my point of view, from the soils perspective, the healthier it is, the happier it is, the more it transfers health benefits to the crops and the livestock that are actually dependent on it. So you're actually beginning to see incremental increases in productivity because climate smart farming is delivering benefits, nutritional, water retention, all the good bits and pieces. I'll give you an example. So we put a cover crop in the autumn, it puts a little bit more functional organic matter back in the ground, that holds a wee bit more water, so that when we go into a hot, dry time in the summer, should we ever have one of those again, that might allow your wheat crop to stay green and growing for 3 more days. Now, the wheat crop's developing yield at a rate of 0.2 or 0.3 of a tonne per hectare per day after flowering. So that cover crop could have actually given you 0.4 or 0.6 of a tonne extra yield. That's just one little fraction of it. Might also be giving you some nitrogen, which nudges you up the yield curve. You might be looking at all the good bits in the soil competing with all the bad bits in the soil to mean that mum plant hasn't got so much challenge, and she can actually do a lot more to get lots of daughter seed running quite comfortably. The last little bit in terms of the good fractions that we're seeing, things like genetics, some wonderful increases in, for example, barley yellow dwarf virus tolerance and resistance in our barley crops. You grow a huge amount of malting barley in this county, the new varieties with virus tolerance, and that's an incredibly difficult thing to give, they are showing significant, I'm not just talking about 2 and 3% yield increases, these are talking about 15 and 20 and 30% yield increases above conventional breeds, because they've got this little bit more attitude to growing in a difficult time. So I think productivity is going to do that. I think the fact that we are increasing productivity on reducing area is testament to what these guys do.
Yeah.
Brilliant. And a stat that I really like is that a teaspoon of soil contains more microorganisms than all the people alive, which is just fascinating, isn't it? Really fascinating.
It is, and if you think about, there's a little bit of a polarised fraction in the market at this point in time. Do we all go vegetarian? Do we all go, does the livestock important? You visit a farm like Angus's and you see the fantastic things that are going on there with crop and livestock integration. But even up on the wolds where you've never seen a livestock and you are constantly cropping, you're a livestock farmer. Because underneath your boots might be 4 or 5 tons a hectare of microbes that are all building soil, they're all recycling carbon, they're all hanging on to nitrogen, they're all delivering health benefits to everything that you grow. It's fantastic.
I'll tell you what, if you've never looked at your soil through a microscope, I bought a microscope last year, having read up a lot about all of this, and had a look at it, and my other half came running because he thought I'd had some kind of terrible accident because I was whooping. I could not believe the things that you could see in there. Just absolutely mind-blowing. Really amazing. So in terms of how do we solve this conundrum? So in order to achieve the things that we want to achieve for the climate, for environment, for water quality, some land is going to be managed differently, inevitably, because we need to protect those water courses, we need to see more trees, etc. What the government wants to see is for that to happen on the right land in the right places. It's typically not going to be the land that's the most productive for farming, whether that's at a micro scale on your particular farm where you've got a bit that's just really difficult to farm, constantly flooded or droughted or whatever it is, or whether that's at a macro, more kind of bigger scale. And what we've got to see is productivity improvements on the rest of the land that offset any land that is taken out of production so you can maintain food production. And what I would say about that is I have no idea on each of your farms what the best way to do that is, and I wouldn't dream of telling you. But what we can see from a government perspective is patterns and the sorts of things that are likely on average to be helpful. And you will all think about these things all the time, but there are always, I think, ways to improve on these 3 things, and they are basically reducing your costs, increasing your income in some way, and reducing waste. Those are basically the 3 ways to make something more productive, whatever it is, whether it's a farm or a shop or anything else. And what we're doing to try and support that from government is the grants that I mentioned earlier to support more innovative technology and approaches, but also more standardised things that can help make the farm more efficient. We're also paying for free business planning advice. And you might say, well, I've already got that covered, thanks. But why would you not get a second opinion for free? But also, there are a lot of farmers who don't have that covered. And we've seen in excess of 15,000 farmers take up that offer. That's not DEFRA giving advice, just to be clear. We're funding organisations that are experts to give advice. And you, the farmer, choose who you want. And I have met farmers who have used that and actually switched to a different advisor, having had that experience and got a different perspective. So take a look at that, because this comes down to individually on what have you already done and what's your opportunity on your particular farm, depending on what assets you've got, what opportunities you've got, and what your preferences are, and what your business model is, and all that kind of stuff. So it's farm by farm. But then also, crucially, I would go back to the SFI payments, where we're paying to help you to de-risk, to adopt some of these practices. So some of the things coming this summer to do with precision techniques, no-till farming, managing your nutrients, managing your soil, managing your pesticides. Those are all things where we can help take the edge off the risk and the cost of adopting some of these practices that can make the farm more efficient. So you've got the kit and the technology, you've got the advice, and you've got revenue payments to help you do it. And the idea is that those things added together will help you do it. But it's got to be the individual farmer that decides what's the right thing for you to do on your farm. And I wouldn't dream for a second of sitting here saying, well, what you should all do is as follows. And I'd expect you to start chucking things at me if I did.
Can I just follow up on that just for a second? One of the things I would urge is if you're going to make decisions like that, you need to be honest. You need to be honest with yourself. If you look at a field and it's 25 acres and you've got 2 or 3 acres that's constantly flooded or always poor performing, that's going to be the bit that is dragging the farm average down. Yeah. You're still spending on it. It's still getting seed, fertilizer, ag chem, crop walking. It's still taking your time and attention.
And it's causing you stress as well.
Causing you stress. Could you put it somewhere else where it would do you benefit, maybe generate an income stream? You don't have to worry about it. Focus on the good bits that you're doing and make them better.
And that comes back to your baselining as well. Yeah. The comment that you made about how important it is to baseline, whether that be carbon, biodiversity, profitability, whatever it may be, baseline what you're doing to be able to monitor where you need to go and how you get there.
Definitely.
Do you want to add in?
Yeah, I mean, one of the key things that I think we've always tried to do is collect data, because if you don't have data, you can't make good decisions. And fortunately, we're working with Neil. I mean, we're presenting that data in a sort of an easy to digest form. I think is quite important. And certainly, with the carbon calculators, I think that's important that they develop. So it's not just a case of this is your carbon number. Well, actually, what does that mean? And actually, how do I actually reduce that number? You know, so it's quite important, I think, if the carbon calculator people do that. But we've always tried to say, let's capture all the data, and sometimes we've probably got data that we didn't really need, but at least that we can never go back in time, unfortunately. And so, using that data to give farmers good and clear and informed knowledge about making the right decisions going forwards.
Thank you. Have we got one last question from the floor, please? I can keep going all day, so I've got a list. Thank you.
A question to the panel on opportunities for new entrants and young farmers in the industry, if you could advise, please.
Brilliant question. Thank you very much. Neil, I'm going to come to you first.
Thank you. If I have a go at that one, I think that new entrants, first-generation farmers, people wanting to get involved with this, I've never seen a more exciting time in agriculture than we're facing now. I think older generations, and I'm allowed to say that because I am one, my time on this planet is coming to a very rapid end, and I have no issue with that at all. I just want to create space for the youngsters to have fun. The important bit is you're going to have skill sets that are going to inform and support and assist the transition to climate smart farming, climate smart food, and a clean, green environment for generations to come. So no pressure, but you're going to be the one that carries the light into the darkness of the future that we're told all about. We're going to help you make it all bright and happy. Opportunities. All the clever bits, I mean, you may not be interested in it, but it could be the digital side of things, the remote sensing side of things. We're seeing innovations in biological management of soil nutrients and diseases, the engineering side of things, the technology that's going into genetics, food marketeering, understanding the value of putting a certain type of food into a dairy cow to reduce its methane emissions, or the same kind of food into a teenager to make them calm and compliant. There's all sorts of things you could get involved with. It's a really fascinating time. Follow your heart, chase what's really exciting to you, bring it into agriculture, because there's opportunity after opportunity after opportunity, and I couldn't stress enough, this is a very, very exciting time.
Yeah, I've got to go with Neil on that. I think we are in a new agricultural revolution. I think there is, there are some headwinds and some challenges for sure, and but I think there is also some enormous opportunities. And I think for British farmers, I think we have the skills to actually produce incredibly healthy food with very low carbon footprints and sequestrate carbon and do our bit for helping the planet and mitigating climate change. And I think we just need more energy, younger people coming in, bringing some of their knowledge from other sectors and just driving the food and farming sector, which I think is undergoing a revolution.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's also important to say, though, that things that are exciting are also often the most stressful things and the most challenging things, aren't they? My job's really exciting. It's also very challenging at times, but nowhere near as challenging as a farmer's, I would always say. So I think we've got to recognise the challenges of access to capital, access to land, pressure on young people, the cost of living in general. All of those sorts of factors here are really important to recognise and be realistic about. But I do think it's really important to think, compared with, say, 50 years ago, the range of routes in now and the opportunity for the entrepreneurial new entrants to find a route in that's going to work for them. I cannot believe the range of ways in I've heard from people that have got into farming as new entrants. I met a guy who'd started sheep farming by getting the local vicar to allow him to graze the graveyard. And that's how he'd shown his worth. And then a landowner let some land because he'd seen he was serious. It's amazing what people can do. So I think there's if you're of an entrepreneurial mindset and you've got a broad range of views about the sorts of routes in that you might follow, then the world's your oyster. I think if you think new entrant means I must get a farm that's mine and that's the first step, then you're really going to face some challenges. And so I think it's about thinking more broadly and in an entrepreneurial way, isn't it? And then all of the sorts of things we've been talking about that are on offer from government, we do try and do those with new entrants in mind and work with new entrants. So SFI will be open to people who haven't claimed BPS from this summer, for example. So make sure that you can take that opportunity, and obviously grants and all the other things are open too. We have had a small-scale pilot on new entrants to see if there's other stuff we can do. We think access to advice is really important. Obviously, access to capital is really important. But also networks are really important, aren't they? For anybody, whether you're a new entrant or otherwise. I'd be nowhere without my support networks and people who can tell me when I'm being an idiot and when I should just take a deep breath and take a leap. And everybody needs that, don't they? So I'd say that's also really important.
One last thing, just to sort of follow up on that one. I think from a younger generation's point of view, when you look at the media and you look at the stories about climate change and everything that's going on, it's really easy to see the future isn't very bright, and it's really easy to hear these stories rob you of your hope. And the intent of events like today really are to put that hope back on the table and to say, look, you know, never give up on your dreams, never let go of what you believe in. The world will always challenge you. There will always be people that will tell you whatever you believe in can't be done. And it's a real test of resolve, and farmers are a very, very resolute bunch. It's a real test of resolve to make good things happen. But I don't think there's ever been a darker time where you could lose hope, but a more exciting time where you can actually fashion your own future better. And it's working your way through that that's really important.
Thank you very much indeed. That was fantastic to finish on. And Janet, you took the words right out of my mouth, which is passion plus skill equals the world is your oyster. So thank you very much for that question. Thank you very much to our panellists for this session. So thank you to Neil Fuller, to Paul Rhodes, and to Janet Hughes. Can we thank them in the usual way?
Great. Well played, Janet.
Thank you. I don't know whether it's just I'm sat in a different direction, but I can definitely smell lunch. So it's now lunchtime. We've got an hour for you to collect some lunch and to complete your networking. If we can be back here at 13:45, 1:45, please, to start again. Thank you.